Hi there, this is Belinda Doveston, and welcome to a brief webinar on the Sirdar Enterprise Governance Compass. Now, the compass that we use is literally a metaphor for a real compass, giving you direction, giving you focus, understanding with clarity where the next step is and where you are and where you need to get to. And so we developed the Sirdar Enterprise Governance Compass as a tool to help people create a context, a framing, a picture, a model of high-performance boards. And we did this because in our exploration of the topic and of what was available, we found a whole lot of disparate information, lots of technical detail, yet no single clear picture of what it means to work with and implement a high-performance board that covered all areas, that created a holistic picture of how the different facets of governance and boards fit together. And so we said, let's develop this compass as a tool, as a means by which we can guide our way forward. And certainly an effective model of high-performance boards can guide a board to focus and clarity. When you have all those dimensions in front of you and you can see the bigger picture, you can see what is required, the directions that as a board you need to go in, it allows you to really create that focus and clarity of choosing a particular direction on purpose and then reorientating back to the center and choosing another direction and building up the strength and robustness of the governance business or the governance facet within an organization. So in this webinar, I'm not going to go over and re-talk through the 8 dimensions of governance because you have that already in Traversing the Avalanche. There's quite a lot of detailed information. Each chapter, or rather each segment of this model has its own chapter, and we've really tried to encompass in there some really useful tools and thinking and application areas around these different aspects and dimensions of governance. What I would like to do today is to go through each of the dimensions and really touch on what are some of the key tools that you should be focusing on as a director in that dimension. Because in the idea of tools and having them in your toolkit, it's about using the right tool at the right time. So if we focus on the right tools as directors, we can bring about the greatest outcome of using that tool. Right, so let's get into it. So the first one is strategy and direction, and this is fulfilling this idea of establishing your true north. Literally about understanding where it is that you really need to go and focusing the board on identifying strategy and direction. And you'll find from each of the chapters in Traversing the Avalanche, right up front at the beginning of a chapter, is a little gray block. And in that block really clarifies the difference between what a board would do in that dimension of governance and what a management would do, what management does. And this delineation between these two is so important because typically, especially if the managing director or the executive team of a company are also shareholders or founders, the management hat is absolutely a default position. And so sitting in a board, it really is quite difficult for an executive director to make that shift of what is a management activity and what's a board activity. Likewise, at a board level, you've got to stay focused on wearing the director hat. So if you don't and you drop down into the manager hat, the board meeting is no longer a board meeting, it's an executive meeting. So really, really make sure that for each of these dimensions of governance, you understand with clarity the difference between what a board does and what management does. So I've got here on the screen a couple of key points, and you can certainly use this as a key reference process. So really the board is focused on the strategic thinking and planning, creating a line of sight from the vision, promise, right through down to the success of those metrics that are defined, and management is the implementer of the strategy and providing reports and support. So larger boards typically might expect that, management does the strategy, we just kind of sign it off. No, management might prepare papers to guide the board's thinking, but the board has to wrestle and get into that strategy and make a decision and sign off the strategy and own it. So the key tools of establishing our true north, or this aspect of governance, is obviously the strategy itself, and there are certainly many different philosophies and ways of determining strategy. Our view is that the simpler the better. It doesn't need to be a long, complex document, but it's really about having a crystal clear vision, mission, and set of clear understandings of what the promise of the organization is as the primary driver. And your strategy might indeed be a couple of strategic objectives or strategic drivers, and those translate into specific tactics. So, and of course from tactics we have targets and outcomes. So it's really quite a simple thing. It doesn't have to be complicated, but as a board, this is what you're tasked to do. And strategy is so important. It can be done so poorly if it's complex and if it's too long in the future. It needs to be short turnaround time, so like a year plan with key milestones perhaps each quarter. Really focusing on having a very, very clear vision of the promise and maybe a longer term outcome, and then setting every year cycle some specific and focused activity that'll take the business to the next level in the period. So that is strategy. Really important that the strategy is measurable, that the tactics and the targets and outcomes are indeed measurable, that you create that line of sight through the organization, that you're focusing on the right things, and that you're focusing on maybe one key thing that's the driver, and not having a dashboard of 20 measures. That's not a strategic dashboard. Maximum 12 measures. It's really about focus and clarity and choosing what's most important and then committing to that. The second dimension is organizational culture, so really about mobilizing your team, and the team being the board as well. So within this dimension of governance, it's as much about the organizational culture as it is about board culture. And so here are the delineation between board and management, and you'll see that the board has to ensure that the culture of the company is defined, and that the culture actually is aligned with strategy, and that is sustainable and feasible, and actually has an alignment to the promise and what is needing to be done. And of course the board champions and lives those promises, lives that promise and the values inside and outside of the boardroom. So it's culture and values are not something that are handed down to a management team to implement and are somehow divorced or separate from the board itself. The board, as the head of the organization, more than anything, needs to demonstrate its commitment to those values and hold itself accountable. And management is needing to then be absolutely clear about what really is the culture that's going on, what's actually happening on the ground, and working towards, through a planning process, through initiatives, of realigning the culture and bringing it back to what is needed for the strategy. Two key tools, and there are more than tools in these, but these are the key tools that you should focus on, is the board charter, which sets out the mandate and the focus of the board itself, how the board behaves, and then the company values, be that a set of core values that have been defined, a set of behaviors. Having a real clear understanding of what your culture and your values are is really critical, and it's not something that is often done with a level of simplicity and power that it could be. It's not about having a plaque on the wall that everyone has to chant. It's about really living and internalizing those values and holding each other accountable every moment that those values indeed are being lived. The third dimension of governance is effective leadership. So here we are creating accountability, and particularly through holding the managing director accountable for performance of the organization. And in that process, the board and management have two roles. The board has to focus on driving company-wide culture of accountability and performance, so that this is obviously a culture carryover, but really about that the organization is focused on performance as a key process, and that there is a culture of accountability. The leadership and performance framework is a key part of that, and most importantly, holding the management team accountable and performance enhancing the chief executive. So, if you had to really summarize everything in this dimension, it's about making sure that the management team, the managing director, has a clear outcomes that they are being held accountable to, and they have the tools and resources to do what they need to do, and then holding them accountable to that standard. And that is the way that you create results within the organization. And that means that if the managing director is the major shareholder in the company, that you and the board are willing to fire them if they are behaving in a way that is counter to the performance agreement. And just as you would any other person in the team, employee, is holding them accountable in exactly the same way. And then management then is operationally responsible for driving and leading the team and delivering performance. So here are the key tools. One is the Chief Executive Performance Enhancement Activities, which requires KPIs, requires a clear understanding of the position of the Chief Executive and the reporting flows, and obviously the agreement between MD and the board as to what that looks like. And that's normally aligned directly to the strategy as an additional perspective. And then the second part is the leadership framework. What is the policy, the model of developing people, of developing leaders, and creating leadership within the organization right across from top to bottom? Engaging diverse perspectives. This is related to the dimension called stakeholder engagement, really about building strength through diversity and by taking into account diverse needs from the stakeholder community. The board is responsible to make sure that the company engages with stakeholders, that we've identified them, that we know who they are, we understand their needs, and that there is a process to engage them. The management must deliver the engagement plan, a report back on progress, flag issues, but it is certainly the board's responsibility to make sure that that has been done and that a broad range of stakeholders are identified and engaged with. And of course then the key deliverable for a board or key tool in your toolkit is the stakeholder engagement plan. In delivering sustainable returns, we find the pure south dimension of shareholder returns. In this particular dimension, the board has a very important role to play in ensuring that returns are from, well, rather the expectations that shareholders have returns have been identified, and that they are sustainable and legal, and that there is formal engagement where performance is reported and discussed. So the board has to focus on making sure that we are engaging with shareholders, that we understand what the expectations are, and that the company is delivering those expectations. Management is tasked with generating the activity that can generate those shareholder returns and providing the relevant reporting and communication support as required. From a tools point of view, I have three here for you. One is a dividend policy, which would set out the company's agreement on how dividends are paid or declared. The dividend policy, or rather dividends, are the mandate of the board. Shareholders don't determine their own dividends. The board must decide what the dividends are and has a process to go through to ensure the company is solvent and liquid after declaring dividends, that they're meeting their directors' duties in terms of the Companies Act. So a dividend policy also helps to agree or communicate to shareholders the company's approach to declaring dividends and how those dividends will work. Then our second tool is what we call a statement of intent. That is, now remember that shareholders cannot tell a board what you must deliver from a strategy point of view or what you must deliver from a return point of view. It is a relationship of risk. We've invested money, and what we can do if we don't agree with what you've done is replace the board or disinvest. So, that's what the shareholders can do. Yet the statement of intent is a very powerful tool to communicate between shareholders and the board what the shareholders really expect for this organization. And it's not necessarily just about a dividend or growth in the value of the asset. It might be specific things related to the contribution to community, the growth of people. So there are a number of different things that shareholders might be interested in, and the statement of intent helps to take away all the noise of unagreed contracts. So in other words, the shareholder's sitting with a view and the board sitting with a view, and unless you agree what your expectations are, vice versa, you don't have the opportunity to make sure that the noise around delivery and non-delivery is removed. And so what will typically happen is the shareholders will mumble, well, this business is just not delivering a return. But unless you've actually sat down and agreed, what do you really expect of it? And is that reasonable? Is what you're expecting in the best interest of the company? And so the statement of intent helps shareholders and directors to frame up what shareholders are expecting, and therefore what the task ahead for the board to deliver on expectations. Okay, so obviously directors have to act in the best interest of the company, so if those expectations put the company at risk. That's something that they have to work with, but it certainly starts the conversation and starts to clarify what it is that really is going to make shareholders excited and want to put more money in, because that's what you want. Shareholders who are engaged and want to contribute more investment. And then your AGM, or annual general meeting, is a very powerful tool. As much as you might be worried as directors that the shareholders are going to fire the whole board, it's their one opportunity to flex the muscle. It's a very important meeting to take place because it allows the entire team to really engage around what has been done, what has been delivered, what are some of the wins, what are some of the challenges, and to present back formally, wearing a director hat, back to shareholders wearing a shareholder hat. What tends to happen in particularly smaller companies is some accountant creates an AGM a set of minutes which are circulated virtually, and everyone signs off, yes, we met and we made these decisions, we approved the financials, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about really getting actively engaged and getting stuck into understanding the company and where it's at and what is needed, even if in the AGM all the same people are wearing both the shareholder and the manager hat, as well as the director hat. Then we have unlocking the value of risk in the dimension called risk management and compliance. In this particular aspect, the board is directly responsible to govern company risk, and with that comes defining what risk tolerance and risk appetite the business is willing to face. In other words, risk appetite, how risk averse or how risk acceptance are we, and then what is the tolerance around that risk level, and then making sure that the culture is aligned to the risk profile. So if you have a high risk environment but you have a company culture that is risk averse, you've got a fundamental problem. And so this is something the board should definitely consider, and making sure that management leverages the opportunity of risk. So often we think of risk as something to be avoided at all cost, but actually business is risk, and how we make good decisions helps us manage risk and unlock the value of risk. So let's help management to do that and not be so risk averse that they aren't able to seize opportunities. Management will then implement the risk management plan and report back to the board, and obviously maintain all the internal and external compliance requirements, standards, and legislation. So key tools for the board here would be a risk management framework. This would be an opportunity to define, for example, appetite and tolerance around risk, and things like the risk decision framework, the process, some of the ways that we categorize risk, what types of risk do we highlight or are more important. And that is a policy, and that helps to guide the board in the way that it thinks about risk. Then the second tool is what we call a risk matrix. This can take a lot of different forms, but is essentially a tool that management would prepare, then submit to the board for review, categorizing the different types of risks, and hopefully quantifying the financial impact of a risk should it occur. When we see a number against a risk and we see how critical it is, we start to see that risks are what risks are really important. Sometimes we always focus on the super big risks, and there are actually sometimes the smaller risks are the little ones that just keep on hurting the organization and keep on incurring cost, and those are the ones we need to sort out. And then the internal audit, which often isn't well done in a private company, particularly a smaller private company, but internal audit would be a process of reviewing the organization's performance against its internal policy and standards. So you might have a particular person who's relatively independent. You can go around and assess every policy, assess every process, and come up with some kind of measurement or indicator report on how well the organization is meeting its own internal standards. So we worry about external compliance. What about the policies that we've defined? Are we actually living the policies that we've all agreed are important? So those are some tools that we can help to work with unlocking the value of risk. Then in achieving the required results, we have the dimension known as financial results. And here we have a lot of activity. Usually this is where most boards spend all their time is worrying about the numbers. And you can see that this is just one of 8 dimensions, not the entire concept of governance. So the board ensures that results achieved meet target and are sustainable, accurate, current, timely, and have control. So one of the things the board has to do is establish in their minds that the financial accounting practices, the reporting practices of the organization do indeed present accurate, timely, and current information. The board must understand the financial model in terms of the drivers of revenue, the drivers of cost, and needs to drive management to improve the financial expertise within the team. Of course, management needs to achieve required financial results and implement and maintain and improve financial management systems. And of course, the quality performance reports and variance analyses on different types of metrics, providing that to the board. So 3 key tools: the financial reports themselves, performance formulae, so this will be your typical things like solvency, liquidity, return on investment, your EBITDAs, etc., your particular formulas that you are referring to and using in your financial pack, and then your financial model. How does the company actually create money? What is the model of making decisions around financial investment, and how does that all fit together? So that's achieving the required results. The last dimension of governance is striving to continuously improve, or known as evaluation and improvement. And here within this aspect is kind of quite simple. It's really about the board focusing on ensuring that the company regularly evaluates its performance and implements continuous improvement. So that is the board evaluation process, the annual board evaluation process. And to some extent, as directors, we need to evaluate our performance at the end of every single board meeting. This is, if we wait just 12 months before we ask the question, how are we doing, we might have some issues. So the board really, it's about after every meeting as a director, you should be asking yourself, being exceptionally critical of your performance and saying, how did I do as a director? How did we do as a board today? What was the real win that we unlocked? And if the win is kind of a little bit low or not quite a wow, it means that something's not happened in that board that should have happened. And of course, the board and directors need to be exceptionally critical of the board's performance. The management implements continuous improvement activities and supports with measurement and reporting systems to flag areas of improvement. And literally this ties into this culture of continuous improvement as well. We don't have time to do everything over and over and over. We need to be intelligent and smart about how we become a learning organization, that as we're doing, we're growing and improving. Within this aspect of governance, there are 3 tools just to highlight. One would be your expedition update, which we'll cover in more detail in a later session, which is really your dashboard of strategic measures and the process of not just presenting, here are the measures, but actually flagging what as an organization is going to happen next to improve the numbers and improve the targets versus actuals. So it's a key driver of continuous improvement. We have the annual board evaluation, which is an absolutely critical activity. And then we have things like the quality policies, the quality system that guides and directs continuous improvement. So there you have it, a model of high performance, the Sirdar Enterprise Governance Compass. Within each of these dimensions, I've shared with you some key tools that can help you as a director to really focus on what are some of the things that we should be doing in each of these areas. There is a lot more information presented through each chapter in Traversing the Avalanche, so I do encourage you to get stuck into those chapters and work through the information and context provided there. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed the session.